Courage is contagious. It was really watching other people sharing their story, seeing that they were okay, seeing the impact that story sharing, storytelling has on other people. I thought, if I can do this, then I have the privilege, but also the duty to share my story.
Welcome to Flip Your Script, the podcast about life's critical turning points and how people find the inspiration and motivation to move forward and rewrite their unique stories. Flip Your Script is produced by Media Minefield, a public relations firm passionate about the power of sharing stories. Specializing in earned and social media, Media Minefield helps clients take control of their unique story and message. The show is hosted by Christy Peel, founder and CEO of Media Minefield, who flipped her script from an Emmy-winning journalist to a successful entrepreneur and speaker.
There is power when we use our voices to share our stories, and today's guest flipped her script when she shared a secret she kept for decades. As a warning, today's episode is not appropriate for children and may trigger people who have suffered sexual trauma or assault. As a 13-year-old, Madeleine Black was attacked and raped. Decades later, she shared her experience in a chat room, and it led to 2 TED Talks, a book, awards, a podcast, and a mission to help people realize it's not what happens to them that defines them, it's how they choose to reclaim their lives. Coming to us from Scotland, welcome to the podcast, Madeleine.
Thank you so much, Christy. Lovely to be here with you.
So your message fits so well with this podcast, and yet it's such a difficult subject and something that many people, as you say, struggle with. It's happened to them, but there's still such a stigma. So let's start with what happened to you when you were an innocent teenage girl.
Sure. Well, my story goes back to the late 1970s. And I guess I did something that most people have done at some point in their life. I lied to my parents about where we were staying. So my friend's mum was away and we had the use of her empty flat. And somehow we managed to buy a bottle of vodka, which I've never been able to even smell, let alone drink again. And we took it to a cafe near to where she lived and we drank it. And obviously it didn't take long for me to get drunk and I threw up everywhere and then they kicked us out. But 2 of the young men from our table put us into a taxi and took us back to my friend's mum's flat. And it just became very clear very quickly, you know, they weren't there to be nice, to make sure I got home safe, to get me out of my clothes I'd been sick in. Then what proceeded was that they both raped me for about 4 to 5 hours before they left.
Wow. It's difficult to hear that 2 people that under the guise of helping would then take advantage of you being so young. Was your friend also raped?
Well, she was put into another room. And when I woke up in the morning, we were now both in the bed and she didn't appear to have been touched at all. So she was still clothed and I was naked and I had injuries on my body and she didn't appear to have any. And I guess I'll never really know. It's something that I've wondered about over the years, whether the same thing happened to her or not. We both really just decided once we woke up in the morning to clean up the flat. I scrubbed my body, we got dressed and we went our separate ways and we really just didn't speak about it again because we thought, you know, we would get into trouble. I'd lied to my mum and dad, I'd bought alcohol, I'd met boys, all of the things that they warned me against. And we thought we'd get into trouble because we were in this empty flat as well. So we didn't speak about it really.
So in your own brain and psyche, did you put it in the back? I mean, did you just shove it away or did it come to you regularly in your thoughts?
Well, no, I realize I'm also a psychotherapist, so I tried to squish it down as much as possible. It wasn't even a conscious decision. It's just something that happens after trauma. But, you know, it has to come out somehow. So even though I couldn't verbally speak about it, my body and my behavior was expressing itself. So I developed an eating disorder. I had fears and phobias. I had many mental health issues. I was very depressed for a long time. I attempted suicide, which landed me into a children's psychiatric ward where I spent 5 or 6 months due to anorexia and suicide ideas. And it really affected me for a long time. And all that time, doing anything just to numb out, to forget about it, to push it far from my consciousness, really. But you pay a price when you do that.
So I suspect as a teenage girl, there's two things happening in your mind. On the one hand, the shame of what had happened, and also this feeling of responsibility that perhaps you did something that your parents told you not to do.
Yes.
And did that make it that much
Yes.
worse?
Even before the internet, young people listening might not understand that. I had already bought into the victim blaming messages out there that, what did I expect? I had been naughty or I'd misbehaved. I'd kind of brought this on myself that this was my fault, but I was drowning in shame. I was drowning in fear and guilt, and they're really hard to step out of. And I really thought that this was my fault, that I couldn't actually work out what I'd done in this lifetime to deserve that kind of treatment. And I thought maybe in a previous life, I've started going back beyond my existence. Maybe I'd been a really awful person and this was payback, for something I had done before I was even born. But yeah, I thought it was some kind of punishment.
And because you didn't talk with anyone, adults, counselors, professionals, you didn't have any way to work through that and to have someone dispel the lies.
Yep. And I know now as a psychotherapist that the quicker we get support and the quicker we can speak about it, then the less chance we have of getting PTSD and combating all the trauma responses. But yeah, so I lived with PTSD and disassociation for years and years and years, because one of the very last things that they said to me, and they had already used the knife on me, they threatened me with a knife and told me if I spoke that they would find me and they would kill me. And one of them, without a doubt, I thought actually he was quite capable. I looked into his eyes and I thought, yeah, he was the one I called the worst one. He could. So that scared me as well. If I spoke about it, that they actually would find me.
How old were these men, do you think?
Oh, they weren't much older than me. They were maybe 17 or 18. I was living in London. I'm a Londoner. And they were sons of diplomats. So they would have just been in the UK for like a couple of years before they went back to America.
And you don't know who these people are? You didn't go to the officials, is that correct?
I knew one of them. One of them lived next door to a friend at school. And actually about a week after the event, she delivered a message from him to say that I owed him money for the taxi because they got us back to the flat. And that made me think, because you push it so far out of your head, I think, well, did it happen what I thought happened, or did it not happen? Maybe he did just get me back there and I was okay. So that was tough, and I was terrified of bumping into them, because we all lived in North London, really scared of seeing them. No, I didn't go to the authorities. I never reported it.
And your parents also, because now you're a parent, and so you as a child went from typical to suddenly, after this event, having all sorts of other behaviors and responses and struggles. Did they ask you what happened? Where is this coming from?
Yeah, they had no idea what was the matter. And I've spoken at length now with my parents. My dad's no longer here, but my mum said to me, actually, she took me to see a therapist because she knew something was up, and I just refused to speak. The whole time I was in the children's psychiatric ward, I didn't speak. I was, just almost an elective mute because I was terrified of saying something in case they found me. And he said, I can't help your daughter, but I can help you. So she then went to see the therapist, how best to support me. But about 3 years later, after the event, I was coming in late. I was told not to go out, but I went out because I was just very rebellious. I think, inside I was trying to tell them what had happened, but I guess my behavior was just an expression of what was going on inside. I was hoping they would guess, when I think back to my behavior. But my mum was waiting up for me early in the morning and she went crazy. And she told me, I was putting myself in danger, that anything could happen to me. And don't I realize what this behavior is doing? So I left a note that morning on my pillow. And when I came back from school, my parents were both waiting for me. And my dad wanted to go to the police and my mum was really quiet. They called my friend who was involved, and I don't know why, but she said it hadn't happened like I said it had. She said that they were nice boys, they just brought us home and they wouldn't do that. My mum was really, really quiet, and it took me many, many years to understand her silence, long after my dad died. But in that moment, I just thought, my friends betrayed me and my mum doesn't believe me. So, it's often not the trauma that's the worst part. It's these things that take place afterwards and the impact of the trauma that actually is harder to deal with, because that was really tough time for me.
You left them a note telling them what had happened.
Yep.
And then your friend denied it. Your mother was quiet. And because of their responses, you then went further down a path of destructive behavior.
Yeah, into a darker spiral, I would say. And it took to after my dad had died, when I was getting therapy for the last time, when my eldest daughter became the age that I was, that my mum revealed to me that as an 8-year-old, she had been raped by her neighbour. And every time my grandma would send her to play with her pal, this man would abuse my mum. But she was able to find her voice. So she told her brother, who told my grandparents, and he was charged. He was sent to jail. It was also discovered he was abusing his 2 daughters. But, when he was inside, my mum's family packed up, moved house, and they never spoke about it again. So when I'm confronting her with my truth, my dad didn't know. They had 5 kids together. Her trauma silenced her, so she couldn't say anything. And she's 81 now, and she never had any therapy. And she's just amazing, because she said eventually, but like 50 years later, she realized it wasn't her fault. And you think, gosh, I've had a load of therapy and my mum had nothing. So yeah, but that took me a long time to understand it. I misunderstood her silence for years.
Oh, that's so sad, because her silence then probably in her own mind she was probably blaming herself. I knew this could happen. I still let her do this. So, that's.
She told me she didn't want me to go to the police. I know now, this many years later, she didn't want me to, go through all the examinations that she had to go through and show them with dolls and toys what happened to her. Actually, 3 years later, I know now, because I've worked at Rape Crisis, there wouldn't have been any physical evidence on my body left, maybe a few scars, but that'd be it. But she just thought she had to protect me that way as well. But she couldn't speak out.
Oh, that's so sad. So you talked just a few minutes ago about your daughter. So you are in this dark place, and then you meet someone, you get married, you have children. How were you able to find yourself worthy to be with a man and have a family?
I think it's divine intervention. It really is, because my behavior got even worse after that time, and I was doing a lot of drugs, and my mum called all my friends' parents to say what we were up to. And it obviously didn't go down too well. They all got into a ton of trouble, and I was advised that maybe I should leave school and go away for a year or something, just to get a new crowd. So I went to Israel for a year, which is where I met my husband. Oh my gosh, nearly 38 years ago. I was just 17, but he was just instinctively, I listened to my gut at that time, and I just thought I can trust him. And I often think, that he was an angel really sent to save me. And initially I said I wasn't going to become a mum. When he eventually asked me to marry him, like 5 years later, I said, I can't. I just was so scared, the idea of giving birth. I thought it would be like being raped again. And in my head, I had these images of giving birth with a room full of men and my feet in stirrup and everybody, being exposed and out of control. And I just thought the easiest way is just not to become a mum. But obviously I have 3 gorgeous girls. I reversed that decision with what I really call my best revenge. That, when he asked me one time when we were away, he wondered out loud about starting a family, and I was just ready to say, no, I can't do it. And I thought, if I don't do this, they've won. I'm giving them all my power and control. They don't even have any idea that I'm doing that. And I just thought, not only am I going to become a mum, but I'm going to live my life as best as I can. I just refused to be identified by what had happened. So I had my 3 daughters, and I thought, that was it. I did this massive thing, which I thought I could never do. I thought I was healed.
Did you tell your husband about what had happened to you before you got married?
He's known like bits of it as we've gone on. Yeah, he knew that I didn't want to have children because the fear came from when I was raped. He didn't know all the details till many, many years later, so I was still too ashamed to tell him all the details at that point, but he knew it was traumatic, and he knew I nearly lost my life, and he knew of some of the injuries on my body, what they were from, yeah.
And then at some point you decide, not only am I going to talk about it, but I'm going to share all of it, and I'm going to help other people. How did you find the courage to really use your voice in that way?
Yeah, I always kind of call myself an accidental speaker because if you told me that years ago, there's no way I ever would have imagined it. Really, I just stand on the shoulders of other women, other people sharing their stories. I heard someone sharing their story and she was actually raped by a serial rapist who had broken into her home, and she was going to meet him in prison. And I just thought she was a warrior. I just thought, oh my gosh, to sit opposite this person in a 3-hour meeting to tell him the impact he had on her life at his restorative justice program. I thought that was quite incredible. So when I was asked to share my story by the Forgiveness Project, and I was told I could be anonymous, I just thought, I am so tired of being ashamed for a crime that was committed against my body, for nothing that I invited in. Why should I still be ashamed? And I had done interviews in the past for newspapers, but I was always one of those silhouetted, women that always sit by a window. I don't know why they always put you by a window. And it just said, Madeleine, 40, London, no details really. And I just thought, I'm tired of being ashamed. And I just went, no, if she can do that, then I can do this. So courage is contagious. So it was watching other people sharing their story, seeing that they were okay, seeing the impact that story sharing, storytelling has on other people. I thought, if I can do this, then I have the privilege, but also the duty to share my story, to help other people find their voice. And the organization I shared it with is called the Forgiveness Project in London. And Marina Cantacuzino, who is the founder, she doesn't call us storytellers, she calls us story healers. And I have just felt that healing power that comes from sharing a story, so many, many times. And I've never looked back from sharing my story publicly.
And you have the 3 daughters. So how difficult is it to talk about what happened to you as their mother when you were their age?
Yeah, I've always told them what had happened. I'm maybe a bit too honest. I always used age-appropriate language. So when they were very little, they just knew that 2 boys hurt mummy very badly. And as they got older, I talked to them about consent, about domestic abuse, about choices, about rape. And they were always aware. And when they've heard me speak, they've been to my TEDx, they've sat in audiences, and now they say, oh, I could tell your story, when I was 13. So they know about it. But what's interesting is that some of their friends will contact me and say, my university roommate, she's just been raped and she doesn't want to tell her mum and she doesn't know where to go, and we thought we'd come to you. So people know me, or their friends know me as someone that speaks out, and I can support them because I'm also a therapist as well. So that's been interesting. Yeah, I think it's really important that I am honest with them and they know exactly what can take place out there.
Going back, knowing all that you know now, and of course we can't go back and do things, what would you have done, knowing what you know now, as that 13-year-old girl the next morning?
I wish, but I don't like to wish because I don't like to have regret, because I think it went the way that it went for whatever reason. But I would just go back and tell her it was never her fault, and to speak out earlier. And if anyone's listening, don't keep it in for years and years, because it was like holding on to poison inside of me. It was damaging me, just keeping that secret. My second TEDx is not out yet, but I start with holding a beach ball. And I just say that the pressure of keeping that secret inside of me was just like holding a beach ball constantly under the water. The fear of anybody finding out. I was just so ashamed. I just thought they would be disgusted, because I was so disgusted. They would look at me differently, that they would just change their opinion of me. But now I know it was never a reflection of me. It was a reflection of the 2 men who chose to rape me. So yeah, I would go back and tell her it was never her fault, and find your voice. Tell someone as soon as you possibly can.
This is so common. The statistics around the world of rape and domestic violence and date rape, it's so shocking. And all of these years have gone by and the numbers aren't getting better.
No.
What can we do to make it better?
And what's even more shocking, especially where I live in Scotland compared to England, they've almost decriminalised rape in our country. Of all cases that make it to court, it's maybe 3 or 4% that actually will end in conviction. So we have a very broken justice system as well. So why would you go to court? I'm a patron and an ambassador for a few charities, and one of the charities is called Justice Is Now. And we look at training the judges and the lawyers within the courts to break rape myths and rape culture. And you think, if the judges and the lawyers come in with these preconceived ideas, what chance do the public have sitting on a jury? We already know so much victim blaming goes on out there. We can't be naive to think that they don't come in there thinking, well, she was wearing lacy thongs, or she was out partying late at night, or she was drinking. It's obviously her fault. So we've got... I used to just think it was just education to start at an early age, which I think it is, but we have to really disrupt all these rape cultures. We have to, when we hear guys laughing about locker room jokes, even sharing, silly jokes, photos, that's all part of the problem. They're maybe not rapists, but it's all part of the issue. Catcalling 13-year-olds from a building site, whistling at them and shouting out obscenities, that's all part of the problem. So we need to find a way, I think, to disrupt all of this conditioning, this rape culture, this victim blaming messages that are out there, and change the justice system. Yeah.
It's a lot. And I think oftentimes when we think about, especially teenagers, we think about the daughters. And I have two sons. One is 18 and one is 14. And we talk a lot about valuing women and look at their eyes and make sure that you're having deep conversations with them if you notice behavior change, because this stuff happens in high schools. It happens where the girl wakes up the next day and says, did I do something? Did he think I wanted it? There's a lot of conversations that need to happen. And to your point, it's the sharing the stories and talking beforehand.
Yes, absolutely. Being absolutely clear, 100% that you've got consent, a very, very clear yes, because people use alcohol. They blame alcohol as a reason why she got raped. But actually, there's even more reason why it can't be a woman's fault. Because if she can't say no, then she can't say yes. We have to be really clear that we know what no means.
And have the conversation long before someone is intoxicated.
Yeah.
Because nobody's making good decisions at that point.
No.
So when we think about the stigma of this to victims, and how can we better talk about what has happened to people to erase that stigma? Because there is so much shame still.
Yeah. I think, the more of us that speak out, it really sends out a message. When I did my TEDx in Glasgow, there were 2,000 people. And the next day I was contacted by a head teacher. And there was a young woman in the audience that had gone there with her school. She was just 16, 17. And I've now met her since. I've been to the Christmas concert at school, and I've got involved with the school. I've trained the teachers. And she said if she hadn't heard me, she would never have found her voice. She was raped by an uncle 3 years prior when she was just 13. And she said she saw me standing there with no shame, and it just gave her hope. So I think if we can show people not just what it looks like to survive after trauma, but how to thrive, that's a real possibility, that will make a difference, and the more of us that speak out, you can feel the groundswell. With Me Too, it wasn't just a moment, it is a movement. It unlocked so many people's silence around the world. With once Alyssa Cinnamon, she started the Me Too again after Tarana Burke. Once she put out, if anyone's ever been sexually harassed, just say the words Me Too. It just went crazy in so many different countries. It just shows you how huge the problem is, but how we are stronger together, how, we can really support each other. That it is a gang, a club, I guess I don't want people to be part of, but sadly, my story is just a story of many, many people.
And again, no blame on your friend. However, I think that there's a powerful message for people, teenagers, 20-somethings who have friends who think something may have happened or are in a position where they think someone is vulnerable and have an opportunity to stop something or to not let somebody get in a car or to escort the drunk person home and to just stand up. And I think it's just easier to leave. It's just easier for people to walk away, because to get involved is to say something and to stop something, and what will they think of me? And that goes down a whole nother path. So we need to use our voices and to protect. Yeah, we have an obligation to protect people.
It's interesting, when my eldest daughter was at that kind of 14, 15-year-old age. I've said to her, look, I don't care if you're out, if you're drunk, if you're stoned, if you're just unhappy, whatever it is, just phone me or dad, and one of us will always come and pick you up. It doesn't matter. And the very first time she tried alcohol, she was about 14, 15 at a party where the parents were out, which I didn't know about. And her friends stopped her from phoning me. She said, phone my mum, my mum will come. And her friends were really scared if they phoned me, they would all get into trouble and Anna would get into trouble. Eventually they phoned. And she said, I told you my mum would come. I told you. And then I started getting them phoning me when they were drunk because they were scared they would get into trouble. But I said, Anna, you're going to get drunk. You know, she's now very sensible, nearly 28-year-old homeowner who's getting married next month and has a dog and a fiance. And she doesn't hardly drink at all, but it's normal. And she was so drunk and she saw that, she was very vulnerable in that situation. And I think she realised that I wasn't there to judge her. It was a normal part of growing up. And that was a lot for me to allow her to go out and get drunk and be a normal teenager. I had to really let go of my fear that the same thing would happen to them. So, I've always told them that we will always look after you if we can.
And there's another part of what you talk about that I want to make sure we discuss, which is forgiveness. Because for you, forgiveness is a critical part of healing. And I suspect that there was a piece of forgiving yourself and a piece of forgiving the people who did this. Yeah,
a huge part was forgiving myself, or actually recognizing you didn't do anything wrong. You know, you were just a naive 13-year-old girl who just got caught up in a situation. I think it was wrong place, wrong time. There were just two opportunists and that was it. And forgiveness is a hard word for people to listen to if they're still caught in a place of anger. But again, I never intended to forgive them. I was just filled with rage and anger and resentment and sarcasm for years. I was a horrible, bitter person. And the idea was suggested to me when I last had therapy. Towards the end of the 3 years, my therapist said, maybe they weren't born rapists. And I just was so angry that he could say something so stupid to me. I couldn't believe that statement. But then it kind of sent me on this journey of inquiry. And in my mind, I don't believe we are born rapists. I think we are all born a blank sheet. My good friend Anne also was my manager when I worked at a counselling centre in Glasgow, and she used to be a midwife. And she told me, which I never forgot, that she had delivered thousands of babies, but she never once met an evil one. And that always stayed with me. And I just then wondered, well, what happened to them? How could they know to be so violent? What had they seen something? Had they experienced something? What had happened to them? And somehow, this is the part I don't understand, in my heart, I felt compassion towards them because I thought, I've done a really, really good job of living my life as best as I can, but they have to live with what they've done to someone else. And whether they're aware or not, I don't think that's an easy path to take as well. And so I saw forgiveness, if I look at the word, it's for giving me a better chance, because it means a lot of things to me. It means understanding. It means no more denying what happened to me. And it means total acceptance of what happened to me. But it also means cutting the chains that tied me to them, that tied me to the past. And it was my key to freedom. But I have to be honest here, I'm not a forgiveness preacher. I don't tell people they have to forgive. It's the only way to heal. This is how I chose to do it. And I would never forgive the act of rape because that just was a total violation, on my body, my mind, and my psyche. And it impacted me for years, decades. But forgiveness was for me. It was an act of self-love. It was totally self-empowering and it was free. It's a choice anyone can make. So it's a lot more peaceful from this side where I'm sitting now than on the other side of anger.
And when you talk with people and you talk about the forgiveness piece, do you find that in your work, most people get there and that helps them? Or is it works for some people and it doesn't work for others?
I think it depends where you are in your journey. If you're still very stuck and very caught and still very, if you're really caught by anger, occasionally I'll get a message and they'll say, how dare you tell me that I have to forgive my abuser or rapist? I say, no, hang on. I've never told you that. That is your choice. And I'm not saying you have to. So some people really, it has an impact. They say, if you can forgive that, then I'm going to let go of this ex-business partner that swindled me from money, and I've been holding on to that anger for years. If you can do that, then surely I can let go of this. So yeah, I have many different responses, many different.
And we've talked specifically about how it's important to use your voice and to tell people. I want to make sure that we also mention that there are many ways that you can dial a hotline, and we'll include a link to some of this on the Flip Your Script podcast website, because if you don't want to tell someone you know, or you don't feel like it's safe to tell someone you know, there are people you can call anonymously who will help as well.
Absolutely. And I have to say, even though I speak out publicly, I don't expect everyone to speak publicly, but it's never too late to find your voice, to speak to a helpline, to find a therapist or a friend. And if you can't find someone like that, then write your story down, tell yourself. For years, I was just caught in denial. And actually, I saw a Brené Brown post. Obviously, everything that Brené Brown does is fabulous, but it said denial, didn't even know I was lying. And I thought, that was perfect, because I didn't know I was lying to myself when I said, it wasn't that bad. We minimize things and we squash it down and we avoid it and distract and don't want to look at it. And actually, it was the looking at it, examining it, speaking about it in therapy that reduced its hold over me. I had to really step into it to get out of it.
And to realize what part of it was yours, which was none.
Absolutely.
You just mentioned a quote, but we always finish the podcast by asking, is there a quote or something that has helped you? Was it the Brené Brown quote, or is there another one you want to share?
You know what? I'm going to mention my dad, because my dad was a Holocaust survivor who lost all of his family. His youngest brother was just 6. They all died in Auschwitz. And it wasn't really by what he said, but how he lived his life that I really saw. Because my dad, if you met him, was just full of life. He was teeny weeny, but he was a huge giant to me. If we really choose to, we can get past anything that happens to us in life.
Thank you for sharing your story. Keep talking. And on this podcast, we talk a lot about the power of story and sharing stories I haven't ever heard before, and I really love it. The healing power of story, and how important it is to share the story, not just to help someone else, but also perhaps to heal yourself. Find your voice, use it, and keep talking. My hope is Madeleine's story empowers you to believe you're capable of more than you think, to discover motivation, to uncover inspiration, and to find the strength to turn the page.
Thank you for listening to Flip Your Script, hosted by Christy Peel and produced by Media Minefield. If you like our message, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also check out flipyourscriptpodcast.com for pictures, resources mentioned in the show, and information about our other great episodes.